I say here in Kentucky to Senator McConnell, stop blocking legislation from coming to the floor of the Senate. Now, if you want to, Senator McConnell, you can vote against that legislation. But we live in a democracy. The Senate is entitled to a debate, and the American people are entitled to know how you vote.
That was presidential candidate Bernie Sanders yesterday in Louisville, Kentucky. More than half a dozen times, Sanders invoked the name of his colleague, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, usually using the word obstructionist to describe him.
Our friend Crystal Ball had to sit down with Sanders in Kentucky. They covered a lot of ground. Senator Sanders continued to be on about McConnell and the filibuster question. Sanders also had a lot to say about the climate debate and how Kentucky and Brazil figure into it. Here's a bit of that interview.
Senator, thank you so much for taking some time for us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Why did you want to come to Kentucky?
For a very simple reason. I happen to believe in democracy, and I happen to be a member of the United States Senate. And there are enormous challenges facing this country and the world. And I'm here in Kentucky because Mitch McConnell, the senator from Kentucky, happens to be the majority leader of the United States Senate. Now, McConnell can vote any way he wants on an issue. But what I find really outrageous and extremely undemocratic is his obstructionism and his refusal to allow major legislation to come to the floor for a debate and for a vote. So essentially, while enormous problems face this country, everybody knows it, there's very little that's going on in the Senate. It is a do-nothing body, and that is because of McConnell. And I came here to Kentucky to ask the people of this state to demand that their United States Senate allow real debate on the floor so that we can begin doing something to represent working families.
So he proudly calls himself the Grim Reaper because he kills any and all Democratic legislation that comes to the floor. He also recently wrote an op-ed saying that we should keep the filibuster in place. What's your view on the filibuster?
Well, let me talk about the Grim Reaper. I mean, and all that he is talking about is that we are seeing some decent legislation, not as strong as I would like, but some decent legislation coming from the House in terms of raising the minimum wage to a living wage. That would be have a profound impact on the state of Kentucky, which, as you know, is a poor state, a lot of low-wage workers in this state. And that you have a senator from Kentucky who is refusing to bring a bill passed in the House to the floor is really an insult to the working people of Kentucky. And that's true for gun safety legislation. It's true for legislation trying to protect the integrity of our elections from interference from Russia and other countries. In terms of the filibuster, I believe we need strong filibuster reform. I don't think that some staff member can send down a message, a note that says we're going to be required to have 60 votes. If you want to have a 60-vote margin, you want to filibuster, get on the floor and talk. I did it for 8.5 hours some years ago. That's what you can do. So I don't believe the Senate should be the House, but I do believe in strong filibuster reform, and also I think on major issues like Medicare for all, which I intend to get passed if elected president, we can do budget reconciliation and other provisions, other ways to get that through with a majority vote.
To me, I think this is one of the most important questions for you and for other presidential contenders. If Mitch McConnell is still in charge of the Senate, how do you get your agenda passed?
Well, I'll tell you how. You do what has historically always been done when real change takes place. And that is you do what I've done today, except coming back as president, we could do it with a little bit more force. And that is speak to the people, state by state, and have them understand what their senator is doing. In my view, the vast majority of the people in this state of Kentucky want to raise that minimum wage to $15 an hour. And if McConnell happens to be, and I hope he will not be, and I'll do everything I can to prevent that, but if he happens to be, to stay on as majority leader, I will be back in Kentucky to talk about the need to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, the need to guarantee health care to all people. And I think when you rally the American people, not just in Kentucky, all over this country, around an agenda that works for working people, you're going to be putting enormous pressure on those elected officials like McConnell, who consistently represent the wealthy and the powerful against the interests of the people in their own states.
So you've just released an ambitious climate change plan. Many people have said it's the most ambitious, the most far-reaching. What's your message to people in a state like this that have been dependent on coal for a long time?
My message is, as maybe the strongest pro-worker member of the United States Senate, somebody who has 100% a pro-union voting record after many years in the Congress. Coal miners are not my enemy. People who work on oil rigs, people who work in the fossil fuel industry, these are working people. They're trying to put food on the table for their kids. They're not my enemy. But what we have to say is that the scientists are 100% clear. Climate change is an unprecedented threat to our country and to our planet. We must aggressively move away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. But the way our plan moves forward is not to leave these guys in the lurch and these women in the lurch. We put tens of billions of dollars into what we call a just transition to say to them, we're not throwing you out on the street. We're going to guarantee you decent jobs. You're going to have health care. You're going to have educational opportunities. The fact that the product that you are working with is destroying the planet, that's not your fault. You're feeding your families. So we stand with you, and we will protect you as we make this fundamental transition in energy in America.
Really interesting segment there from Crystal. I mean, the thing that strikes me most is not just that. I mean, we've heard Bernie talk about how he's going to go to Kentucky and hold rallies if he wins the presidency to try and force McConnell to do something, but more that he's not actually for the total abolition of the filibuster.
Yeah.
Kind of puts him out of step with actually some of the other Democratic candidates on this issue, right?
Yeah, and a lot of the activists who believe this is the case. But, you know, Bernie Sanders, in his defense here, he's been around for a long time.
Right. He's an institutionalist, actually.
And he knows what happens when you're in the majority and you need to have a rule, and when you're in the minority and you need to have it.
Right.
The likelihood is Democrats could win the Senate back if they have a good election day next year, and they could impose a rule like this, but it won't last forever. The Senate flip-flops too much.
Well, it's funny, too, because I've seen from him, and I've said, oh, you know, Bernie says he's just going to go to Kentucky and hold rallies to force McConnell to do something. I mean, I think McConnell would frankly relish that. If Bernie were president, he'd be like, great, you know, you're just going to drive my poll numbers up. But it is interesting to see Bernie, who is so much of a revolutionary in many other respects, not commit to the total abolition of the filibuster. It does show something that I haven't seen from him before, which is a little bit of a political realism and about how these things works. And maybe it's an encouraging sign if he wants to continue his rise upward.
It is the kind of thing that I think probably some people in the establishment who have trouble with Bernie Sanders may start to like him a little bit more. They think, okay, maybe we could do business with Bernie more than we thought because he seems to be holding on.
Right, and I think that if he tries to bring these things together, and we're going to see a little bit more of what he talks about, which is really, I mean, in the rest of the interview that will be airing later, he talks so much about some really revolutionary policies. But I think it's like you said, if he's able to keep some of this DC consensus on the filibuster, that won't scare people enough, and it might just be enough to put people behind him when he wins, if he wins the nomination.
Well, you know, one more thing. What's interesting about him being in Kentucky is that it smells a little bit like what Beto was doing. You know, Beto decided to skip out of Iowa and started going around the country and campaigning around, particularly around immigration and some of the social issues in a way. So Bernie Sanders is kind of doing this around economic issues outside of Iowa. That's interesting. It's an interesting overlap between those two campaigns.
Very smart for him. That's the way he's going to raise a lot of money.
Absolutely.
So KB was going to be back tomorrow. She's going to talk about a revelatory statement that Sanders made that actually surprised her. You're not going to want to miss that.
Next on Rising, he's one of the most well-known moderates in the 2020 Democratic primary field.
Presidential candidate John Delaney, he discusses the next steps for his campaign and his thoughts on how to stop a recession when Rising continues.